Welcome and thanks for joining us for 10 minutes with Jay Budziszewski. I'm Jeremy Beer, and that's Jay, professor of government and philosophy at the University of Texas at Austin, and the author of Pandemic of Lunacy: How to Think Clearly When Everyone Around You Seems Crazy. Pandemic of Lunacy will be published by Creed and Culture on February 3rd, 2026, but you can pre-order it now at creedandculture.com or Amazon, everywhere else. Jay, how are you?
I'm great, thanks. How are you?
Great. Thanks for doing this. So we'll jump right in. This book, you have short chapters on 30 contemporary lunacies. Um, they range from a lunacy like men and women aren't different, or everyone can have his or her own reality, things like that. Um, which of these lunacies would you consider the most lunatic, or perhaps the most sort of foundational for the rest?
Yeah, well, I knew that you were going to ask that question ahead of time, and I have to admit, I find it a very difficult question. One of the reasons I wrote this book is that they can all be foundational in different ways. You
Hmm.
start, for instance, with the idea that men and women are exactly the same, and you try to live that way, and it's going to lead to such disorders in your family life and your relations with the other sex that then you that changes the nature of your experience. And then and if your experience isn't normal, your thinking becomes screwed up. For instance, if you think that there's a war between the sexes and you can't trust any men or you can't trust any women, well, you're that's gonna be a self-fulfilling prediction. Your
Mm.
relationships will not work, and so it bleeds into this other kind of thing. Do you see what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
Or if you think, well, there is no God. Now, I know people who think that there is no God and who do think that there is a good and evil and who
Right.
do think that the universe has meaning and
Yeah.
who do think that things make sense. But on the other hand, it's foundational in many ways because
Yeah.
most people who don't believe in a God do have difficulty believing that the universe is making sense or
Yeah.
that there's really an objective foundation for the distinction between good and evil or any of these other kinds of things. And it's not just a psychological propensity. I mean, look, if there's no God, considering that God, as now as I'm using the term, isn't like Zeus, isn't like a
Right.
Marvel's
Yeah.
comic book hero.
This is the
This
Christian
is
God,
this
essentially.
is the Christian God, or at least the God of Western theism.
Right.
This is the God who is the first cause of everything. Well, among other things, that means he's the first meaning. If there was no God of this kind, that means there's no explanation for the universe at all. It didn't have a first cause. It just is. It doesn't make sense. So why should you believe anything else makes sense? Why not just say, well, maybe frogs will rain from heaven tomorrow? You would say, oh,
Yeah.
that's silly. I know that won't happen. Well, if you think that the universe itself doesn't have to have any explanation, why should you not think that these other things can happen without explanation? So you see, one idea bleeds into another.
Yeah.
Or we may say, well, sometimes you just have to do the wrong thing. That's another one of the lunacies I discuss. That
Hmm.
can be foundational because then you find excuses to do the wrong thing. Um, and if
Yeah.
you do, then it starts troubling your conscience, and you have to dig in. If you're not
Justif
going to repent, you have to find arguments in favor of what you did, and though the premises of those arguments are going to lead you to justify all kinds of other wrong things that you hadn't even thought about doing in the first place. Like, for
Right.
instance, if I treat you badly and I don't really repent, in order to live with myself, I'm going to have to convince myself that you deserved it.
Yeah.
But if I convince you myself that you deserved it, then maybe I'm going to start treating you in other bad ways
Yeah.
or treating other people. So all
Right.
of these things can lead to can lead to others.
I didn't know that's how you would answer that question, but it's a really interesting. Each of them can be existentially foundational for a particular individual at a particular time and place. Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought as a philosopher you would go right to the ontological question, the metaphysical questions, the
Well,
theological.
I'm tempted to. I'm
Yeah.
tempted to. I'm tempted to start with God. People thinking it doesn't matter if there's a God.
Right.
You can't know whether there's a God. Religion isn't about God, really. It's just about our feelings. I'm tempted to start there for exactly that reason.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it doesn't always work in that order.
Is it how it
Okay.
really plays out necessarily in people's
It's
lives?
how it plays out for the particular individual, and all these things are interconnected, which is why I wrote a book about all of them.
Yeah. Right.
There are a lot of other books out there, Jeremy,
Yeah.
on one or another of these lunacies, but I wanted to tie them together.
Are there are you able to make a distinction for this question, which would be a little different? Which of the lunacies you discuss in the book would you say are the most seductive in this world, or the ones that perhaps you look at
Yeah,
as the readers should worry about the most for their kids or their
yeah,
grandkids?
yeah. This is a tough one too. Some of them are more seductive than others. But sometimes it depends on the person. For
Yeah.
instance, if a person of toward the right end of the political spectrum, who's
Hmm.
influenced by libertarianism, who's read Ayn Rand, and all that kind of thing, might fall into the lunacy that there is no such thing as the common good.
Right.
There's only individuals.
Right.
Well, there's a grain of truth in that because we're not just there is the society is not just a mega individual of which we're all just fingers.
Right.
But this goes way too far to the other extent. On the other hand, somebody who's more inclined to the other end of the political spectrum, the left, is likely to fall into the spectrum that the purpose of government is to take care of all our needs. And
Hmm.
that is deadly, and it leads on a pretty nearly straight course, although it may take a while, to totalitarianism and to an infantilizing government,
Right.
which just squeezes all the oxygen out of the room so that individuals can't breathe anymore. Um, on the other hand, with depending on who I'm talking to, I have a lot. I've been teaching for a good many years, more than 40, and my students are confused about many things. But where does their confusion start? With some of them, it is the ontological thing.
Yeah.
That's the most. That would be the place to start. That would be the most seductive to them. And that's also true, especially why is disbelief in God most seductive? Well, among young men. Now, this is changing. This is getting to
Mhm.
be young women now too, but for a while it was only young men. So many of them come from splintered family backgrounds that they didn't have the influence of a dad in their life, or they had an influence in the dad, but he wasn't reliable. He wasn't there for them. They're
Yes.
angry at him, and they look. Our fathers are the first model that we have
Yeah.
of God the Father, and so they project all of that on God, and they're angry at him, and they get back at him by not believing that he exists. So
Mm.
so that can be seductive for somebody in that sense, or it
Right.
can be seductive because it seems to be the fad. All the smart people that I know don't believe in God, or all the smart people that I know that right and wrong is different in every society, or all the smart people that I know think that everybody has a different nature. My nature is heterosexual, yours is I don't know, xenosexual,
Yeah.
and so that can be seductive for somebody there.
Yeah.
If you're in the tech world,
Mm.
now this didn't used to be the case. So-called transhumanism, the idea that we can
Mhm.
transcend our own nature, that we can
Yep.
become better than human,
Yep.
whether with drugs or technology or implants in our brains or genetic monkeying or pheromones pumped into the air in the factory so that we'll never want to go on strike. The idea that we can become different than human or more than human has been around for about 4 generations. But now it's especially current in the tech world. It's in the air, it's in the atmosphere. A lot of the common names who founded all these big tech companies or who
Right.
are in AI uh, are determined to push this, and it has dreadful consequences. Do you want to have a world in which soldiers never have to sleep for days on end, and are physically incapable of disobeying their orders no matter how unjust they are? I don't want a world like that.
No.
Do we
No.
want to have a world in which we're all genetically engineered or given drugs so that we never feel guilty no matter what we've done? I don't want a world like that, but that's where transhumanism leads. And for many people, especially in that world, that's seductive. So, so again, it's
Yeah.
kind of like the question, which is most foundational. The question of
Right.
which is most seductive depends on who you're talking to.
But they are all interconnected. It's a really interesting point you make. Sort of as just as in Plato, the virtues tend to all come together, right?
Yeah,
The
yeah.
point is the
This
lunacies all sort of come together.
This is
Well,
yeah, Aristotle's better at that than Plato.
sorry, I'm sorry, Aristotle, my
But this
fault.
is this is yeah, that's called the doctrine of the interconnectedness of the virtues. You might
Yeah.
think, well, I always laugh when I think of Benjamin Franklin because
Yeah.
we know from his diaries when he was a kid, he said, "Today I'll work on this virtue."
Yeah.
And he wouldn't think about the others. Today I'll work on this other virtue. It doesn't work that way. If there is something wrong with your courage, that's going to be something wrong with your sense of justice.
Mm,
If there's something wrong with your sense of justice, you're probably not going to be a very good or a loyal friend or
right.
spouse. If there's something, all the virtues are connected. A touch on any strand of the web makes the whole darn web quiver.
Yep. Well, last question for you here then. Uh, you mentioned xenosexuality earlier. We
Yeah,
talked about this earlier
xenogender, I
today.
should have said. That's the word. That's the
Xenogender,
buzzword.
which tell people what xenogender.
Okay. Ze they're always inventing new genders.
Yeah.
Xenogender. I'm not making this up. Xenogender is a gender which transcends human understandings of gender. People are sometimes asked on forums whether they are xenogender. There's
Yeah.
a program in California where you can get stipends if you have some strange sexuality. And one of the 97 or something like that options that you can check off is I'm a xenogender. The Now, if it's a gender beyond all human conceptions of gender, how would you even know that there is such a gender? How would you even know that you have it? It's
Self-defeating.
just lunacy.
And this is
But
sort of reason why people will, I think, resonate with this book.
oh,
But
I hope so.
your point is don't just you can't just laugh this away. That there's a core of seriousness behind what you might first be tempted to sort of just hand wave away as silliness that doesn't really matter.
Yes, yes, yes. It isn't just silliness. It's ruining lives.
Yeah.
We just mentioned gender silliness.
Yeah.
A friend of mine, my children are grown up, but a friend of mine who has teenage children and they're in the public schools, reports to me that fully half of the female friends of his older daughter claim now to be trans. They
Mm,
claim to be boys. This is doing such damage, and then we call it gender affirming care. I tell you, it's not affirming somebody to give them powerful drugs that ruin the chemical balance of their bodies, and then to surgically mutilate them
mm.
and make it impossible in the case of a woman for her ever to bear children. This isn't affirming in any way, and it isn't affirming what their true gender is. You're a man. I'm a woman. People say, well, but it's the science. It's scientifically demonstrated that there are men who are women and women who are men. No, that so-called evidence is that there are lots of people who say that they are, or who say that they feel that they are. But if they're not, how would they know what the other sex feels like anyway?
Yeah. We're
So,
at 10
so this
minutes.
does damage. This does
Yeah.
damage. It does damage. These various lunacies do damage in our relationship with God, in our sense of good and evil, in our relationships with our wives and our husbands, in our relationship with our children, with our friends, in the society, in our politics. They mess up everything.
Indeed. But one of the lunacies you have in the book, by the way, is that science and experts are neutral authorities, and
Oh
that's
yeah.
another thing that people will learn when they purchase Pandemic of Lunacy: How to Think Clearly When Everyone Around You Seems Crazy. It's available for pre-order now. If you go to creedandculture.com and use the code Launch Club, you get 30% off. So encourage people to do that. And Jay, thank you very much for your time here today.
Well, thank you. I've enjoyed it.